Assalamu alaikum. Alhamdulillah, salatu ala Muhammadan Rasulillah. Inshallah, we'll start. And for those who came in person, thank you for braving the cold. So inshallah, as you know, we'll be starting this series. And today, the first one, we'll be talking specifically about the person, Ibn Khaldun, a little bit more about his context, obviously. So Ibn Khaldun is a personality that until today, in fact, especially today, is claimed by many different groups. And sometimes these groups, they have really conflicting ideologies. And for example, this is from a newly founded university in Turkey. Its name is Ibn Khaldun. So this is, in a sense, it represents the people who see Ibn Khaldun as a genius within the Islamic tradition. But those are not the only people who claim Ibn Khaldun. Ibn Khaldun is claimed by leftists, secularists, people who have a completely different agenda. So it seems that he speaks, or he's able to be perceived or to be understood by people of different backgrounds. In fact, the last thing that I heard, it was just by chance, it was a leader of a conservative political party in Europe who quoted Ibn Khaldun to prove or to make the point that low taxes are an old wisdom and it works. And he attributed that to Ibn Khaldun, which is true to a large extent. That was the British Boris Johnson, by the way. Now, outside politics, there are some people that are more serious, and he is also claimed by them. And here, I just would like, you don't see it here, but in the note, I probably have it in a different place. Yeah, I have it in a different. If you see the article there, so the name of the article is Ibn Khaldun, the last Greek and first analyst historian. And by this statement, it is a very serious article. Okay? Ibn Khaldun is completely put within the Western intellectual tradition. He's the last Greek historian. So that's antiquity. And he's the first analyst historian. So analyst historian, for those who do not know, so these, it's called the Annales school. It's originally a French school of history, and generally speaking, the philosophy of history. It was active, it started to be quite active in the 19th century, but it flourished in the 20th century. And they are known for what they call total history, meaning that you have history, obviously, is not only political events, and you have to take care of everyday life to have a big picture of what's going on. And they have a number of concepts. Some of you might have used them. You have the concept of what they call mentalité or mentalities, meaning that the belief system is, whether you accept it or not, meaning whether you believe it or not, has an impact in how history unfolds itself, shall we say. Another concept that is quite used lately, and it's still massively used, is what's called the longue durée, the long term. And these now are everyday terms used in sociology and anthropology. Now, Ibn Khaldun is seen as the first, at least the claim here, is the first representative of this school. And the reason is that, as we will see inshallah in details, that Ibn Khaldun insists that understanding things like the geography is key to understanding the history that took place in that place. And that's, for example, you have to look for the location of the city. For example, if it is surrounded by fertile plains, those fertile plains, of course, they will be able to support a certain number. And beyond that number, it's just impossible technically. That's why, for example, in his critique of a lot of claims in history, he uses arguments like this. And he can be very, very brutal. If it doesn't make sense, and because Ibn Khaldun believes that human history, human civilization work, it has rules, like nature has rules. Society, human societies, they have also rules. And you have to understand those rules. Otherwise, you are not doing history. So, so that's related to the Anal school. One of their leaders, shall we say, or very good representative, is Ferdinand Braudel, and who is pretty much the star of that school. So it was called Anal because of a journal that they published, and where it became a very big venue for their discussions. Anal, it means just, it's a yearly study. That's what is the word represents. Khair. We'll go back to where we were. Now, Ibn Khaldun talking about the interest that he still raises, is that when you read Ibn Khaldun, he is very intelligible to people who have a modern education in our time. It's very easy to follow his arguments. You don't have to conclude his conclusions, but you can see that he is making a very clear, rational argument, and usually he's very convincing. And as we said, because he believes that human history has rules and social phenomena can be explained by he does it often, by what sounds like very materialist explanations. So that's why he's very easily to be appreciated by people of our time. Now, Ibn Khaldun, and as you see, his full name is Abu Zayd. That's his kunya. Abdul Rahman, first name. Ibn Khaldun al-Hadrami. That's how he introduces himself. And we have the dates. He was born 732 Hijrah, equivalent of 1332 Miladi, Christian era, and died, rahimahullah, 808 for Hijrah, 1406. Now, for historians of North Africa, when they see a name like this, Ibn Khaldun, and focus on the suffix waw nun, Ibn Khaldun. So names like these, they're a bit common, not too common. By default, they are Andalusi names. By default, they are Andalusi names. So you have Ibn Farhun, Ibn Zaydun, and so forth. That was a tradition in Al-Andalus. And they added waw nun for usually to show some kind of respect, للتعظيم. And so that tells us, by default, at least it suggests, that this person has an Andalusi background. And indeed, that's the case. Al-Hadrami, so the nisbah to Hadramaut, we will explain it later, inshallah, but that's how he introduces himself in his book. Now, we are very well informed about Ibn Khaldun. And one reason for that in the end of his book, he introduced himself, and in the end it became almost a book in itself, and sometimes that book is published by itself. So, and the name is what you have here, التعريف بابن خلدون ورحلته غربا وشرقا, which is a very exhaustive autobiography. So he wrote it about himself, and he gave very important details. For example, the letters and the correspondence that he exchanged with very major figures in Islamic history are included there. For example, I think almost 1/6 of the book is the correspondence between him and another Andalusi. He's very known in literature, Ibn al-Khatib. So it's extremely well documented. Now, when he talks about himself, he will introduce us to his family, Ibn Khaldun. And Ibn Khaldun's family, this Andalusi family, is very well known, especially amongst the ruling classes and among scholars in North Africa, especially in Al-Andalus and beyond. So obviously in Islamic history, in history period, generally speaking, we are very familiar with dynasties who have political power. Now, this is, I mean, dynasty might be a strong word. Ibn Khaldun is a scholarly family, more than scholarly, that is very well known. Now, for example, Al-Imam Ibn Hazm al-Zahiri, he will talk about this family in his book, Jamharat Ansab al-Arab. Now, so Ibn Hazm, and we give the date when he died, rahimahullah, so 457 Hijrah, 1065 Miladi. So in his Jamharat al-Arab, Ansab al-Arab, he talks about the family Ibn Khaldun. And this is what he said. I will quote, then we'll translate it if need be. وجدهم, so of Ibn Khaldun, الداخل من الشرق, the one who, الداخل meaning that he came to Andalus, من الشرق, from the east, from the Islamic East. Khalid, that's his name. Al-Ma'ruf bi Khaldun. And notice the switch from Khalid to Khaldun. These are the same person, but Khaldun is that Andalusi tradition of giving the wawnun for respect. Al-Ma'ruf bi Khaldun. So who is Khaldun? Ibn Uthman, Ibn Hani, Ibn al-Khattab, Ibn Qurayb, Ibn Ma'di Karib, Ibn Wa'il, Ibn Hujr. Okay. Now it doesn't. This person is given the genealogy until Wa'il ibn Hujr. Now, why they stopped there is because Wa'il ibn Hujr is a Sahabi. So Khalid ibn Uthman, the founder of this family in Al-Andalus, is a descendant of a Sahabi. Now, this Sahabi is very well known, I mean, to some degree. For example, Al-Isti'ab of Imam Ibn Abd al-Barr will talk about who is Wa'il ibn Hujr. And he narrates a hadith that talks about the Prophet ﷺ receiving Wa'il ibn Hujr, welcoming him and doing dua for him. And this is the dua that is attributed to the Prophet ﷺ, and it's narrated in Al-Isti'ab. Allahumma barik fi Wa'il ibn Hujr, with the Dhamma, by the way. Wa waladihi or wuldihi, wa waladi waladihi iya ila yawm al-qiyamah. So this is the hadith that's narrated in Al-Isti'ab, and Ibn Hajar refers to it. Now, so the family is an Andalus. It established itself very well. And here we'll go to, and for example, when you see Ibn Khaldun, of course, we think about the author that we are dealing with. But obviously in history books, that's not only the person that they know. They will give us another example here, is that, to this last line, 3 centuries before Ibn Khaldun lived, meaning our Ibn Khaldun, there was somebody called Abu Muslim Umar Ibn Khaldun al-Hadrami. Notice 2 things, that Ibn Khaldun and also Nisba al-Hadrami is still there. This is 3 centuries. Now, Abu Muslim is mainly known for being a very accomplished mathematician and astronomer. So he was a scholar, but in العلوم العقلية, especially in astronomy. And another reference to this family is by an Andalusi historian, Ibn Hayyan al-Qurtubi, died 469, 11th century Christian era. And he talks about the family as a whole. So, Baytu, I will read this in Arabic, inshallah. Baytu Bani Khaldun ila al-an, so meaning he's talking until his time. Fi Ishbiliya, Sevilla or Seville in Spain. How he described that family, Nihayatun fi nabaha, extremely prominent. ولم تزل أعلامه بين رياسة سلطانية ورياسة علمية. So there, shall we say, the leaders of that family, they are between government leadership, especially as wuzara and the like, or scholarly leadership. So this is important to understand where Ibn Khaldun is coming from. And because in his book, he will be referring a little bit to his family, the family of his history. For example, sometimes he had a governmental job and he was not very pleased about it. And he said, because none of my ancestors had a similar job. You take it the way you want, but at least it is in his mind. نعم. Now, the city of Ishbilia in Spain, Sevilla, Seville in English, is where his family allied itself with governors, Almohad governors. So the Almohads, they are a dynasty that ruled in North Africa and Spain and Portugal, obviously. And mainly in the 12th century, as you can see, mainly. And this Almohad dynasty, it's as you see, it's an empire, so it includes, for example, the territories include at least part of about 5 nations now: Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, a little bit of Libya, part of Spain, and part of Portugal. So it's a massive empire. Okay. So they have governors, and in Ishbilia they put Banu Hafs, and Banu Hafs are very early participants in the rise of the Almohad dynasty, meaning even before it was a dynasty, when the previous dynasty, the Almoravids, were still active. And so he is, shall we say, Abu Hafs, Umar, his name is Umar, I think Umar ibn Abi Hafs. In fact, that's not his real name. This is a side note. It's the name that Ibn Tumart, the founder of the dynasty, or of the movement rather than the dynasty, gave it to him. And he had a tribal name, something like Inti, which is a Berber tribal name. His name, I just happened to have was Fasca Inti, which is shall we say, which is a Berber name. So Fasca means something like Qurbani. Anyway, his name was changed. The point here is that the governors of Ishbilia, once they started being pressured by the Christian forces in Spain and Portugal, and they ultimately moved to Tunis. They moved to Tunis. Now, another note about the Almohad Empire. An Almohad Empire, it is during their time that the Iberian Peninsula, Al-Andalus, started losing, by Al-Andalus, I mean the Islamic presence, they started really losing massive lands. And which is unlike the previous dynasty, the Al-Murabitun, which their lands in Andalus were quite extensive. Now, when they moved to Tunis, they brought later their allies, which were Banu Khaldun. So that's explain why Ibn Khaldun was born in Tunis. That's what explained the movement of his family from Ishbilia to Tunis. His family, for example, both his great-grandfather and grandfather worked as wazirs, technically the word we used hajib, for the Hafsids. Now, the Hafsids, for those who do not know, they were governors for the Almohads, but later they claimed independence and they ruled Tunis for themselves. Now, so unlike his great-grandfather and his grandfather, his father of Ibn Khaldun, Muhammad, he dedicated himself to scholarship and was also obviously the first teacher of Ibn Khaldun. So now that's the background that we needed somehow to mention. Now we'll go to Ibn Khaldun. So Ibn Khaldun, he was, as you said, introduced to ilm by his father, and he was trained because Andalus, North Africa, and at that time and still are basically a Maliki tradition. So he's trained as a Maliki alim. So obviously Quran, Qira'at, Nahu, Sarf, Aqidah, logic, mathematics, and the rest. So he was trained, and he gives a very long list of his teachers in his ta'rif. However, he focuses on two scholars, which are named here, Ibn Abd al-Muhaymin al-Hadrami, who taught him Hadith and Nahu, and another scholar, Muhammad ibn Ibrahim al-Abili. Abili is nisba ila Abil, which is in Spain, in Andalus. Now, this Abili taught him especially al-ulum al-aqliya. He taught him logic, usul, mathematics, and what's Abdurrahman ibn Khaldun called al-fununu al-hikamiyya wa-ta'limiyya. So it means especially things that are highly rational. So al-hikamiyya, there is a suggestion that it is like philosophy, but it doesn't have to be. Al-ta'limiyya. Now, in Ibn Khaldun, al-ta'limiyya, or the expression al-ta'alim, he means things like mathematics. Now, modern scholars, they focus a lot on al-Abili. They focus a lot on al-Abili because they almost want to see in al-Abili where the rational almost materialistic approach of Ibn Khaldun is coming from. And they link it to an Andalusi tradition, ultimately to people like Ibn Rushd al-Hafid, the grandson, the very well-known philosopher, especially in the Aristotelian tradition. And they say it must have been Al-Abili who trained Ibn Khaldun in that manner. And that explains why Ibn Khaldun has that tendency to give material explanations for everything and to see rules and laws, everything. نعم, inshallah. Now, the education of Ibn Khaldun continued in Tunisia and until something quite dramatic happened. So for when he was about 18, 19 perhaps, okay, something happened is that a very massive plague known as the Black Plague hit the world, especially Europe and the Mediterranean, and it reached Tunisia. That was a very dramatic moment. And obviously thousands of people died. And for Ibn Khaldun, it was very personal because he lost both of his parents. Not only that, he said that basically all of the teachers were gone. So at that moment, he basically, he's no longer a student in the traditional sense. And he said that he wanted to move to Morocco. And had it not been for his brother, his elder brother, Muhammad, he wouldn't have stayed in Tunisia. Now, after that time, what happens is that Ibn Khaldun will go for a political career. And when we say political here, it's a little bit more, it has not exactly the way we understand it now. For example, it's more administrative. Now, so the Black Death, so that's hit Tunis in 749. Ibn Khaldun, just to give you the Arabic word, he called it الطاعون الجارف. الطاعون الجارف. نعم. So for about 25 years, he will be engaged in politics. And he will work for, first of all, for Hafsid Wazir, so the same dynasty with whom his ancestors work. Although that very specific Wazir will become a rebel and claim power for his own, for himself. Naam, but that didn't last for long. So what Ibn Khaldun was doing for him, he called something like Sahibul Alama. So meaning that he was, in a sense, of course, he was giving counsel, but also he was like not speech writing, but something very similar. Speech writing for the Wazir. Speech here, they are really written documents that they are sent correspondences. Now, so he joined somebody called Ibn Tafrakin, as we said, the former Hafsid Wazir, and so that was his first governmental job. And now we'll spend a little bit of time on his career because that remind us that Ibn Khaldun, when he was writing his history, he was not writing only as a scholar, but also as somebody who was involved in everyday politics and management and administration. And that will give him some insights that will become quite apparent, inshallah, when we'll see the examples. He didn't last with Ibn Tafarkin for long, because after that he will join the Marinid dynasty. So the Marinid dynasty, just to go back to that map. So after the Almohads, the imperial time in North Africa basically ceased. And they were succeeded mainly with three entities. They are roughly similar to what's now Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia. Okay. The strongest by far was the Marinids, that their capital was in Fas. In Algeria was what they were called Banu Abdul Wad. Their capital was mainly in Tilimsan. And Al-Hafsiyun were in Tunis. Now, the Marini, for quite a bit, they extended their power over both the territories of Banu Abdul Wad in Algeria and the Hafsids. And they spent, for example, the Marini Sultan spent about, I think, almost 2 years in Tunis, meaning he had the control of the region. Now, and it's then where Ibn Khaldun will be introduced to the Marinids, and he will join their court back in Fas in Morocco. And he works for them for basically 8 years, on and off, okay? Because 2 years he will spend them in jail, because he was suspected of plotting with a former Hafsid ruler, and he was released. There was an exchange, but he said, I was not cautious. I should not have done it, because the suspicion was inevitable. Now, so and depending on, so we're talking about the Marinids. So he works for them, we said, for about almost 8 years. And in the end, he will be he will also so talking about the Maghreb, just to make it so the Maghreb is usually what we call North Africa now, especially Morocco, Algeria is in Tunisia. So, and Ibn Khaldun was mainly with the Marinid, but for a while he, especially when he was dismissed, he will go to other rulers, but that didn't last for long. In one example, he went to Al-Andalus, and where he stayed with, so the dynasty in Al-Andalus, in southern Spain, a little bit of Portugal, is Banu al-Ahmar. Banu al-Ahmar, you can see Granada, and he stayed with them for about 2 years and a half. And what's interesting that it seems that Ibn Khaldun was appreciated for his negotiation skills. He were used, for example, in the Maghreb. He was used as an interlocutor, negotiation with tribes, for example, quite often. But now he was sent to he's known to in English, Peter the Cruel, and he was ruling from Sevilla, from Seville, the former home of Ibn Khaldun's family. So what we need to know about that when Ibn Khaldun talks about this episode, first of all, he said that he went to the negotiation, everything went well. However, in Sevilla, Peter the Cruel invited him to stay, as part of his court, and that was not unusual in those times. We'll say two things. First of all, one of the doctors of Pedro, Peter the Cruel, was Ibrahim ibn Zarzur, who was a doctor that he was a Jewish doctor, physician, who worked for the Marini Sultan when Ibn Khaldun was there. So they knew each other. And the Banu, the Peter knew about him, and he told him to stay. And he, shall we say, tried to bribe him. He told him that we will return the possessions of your family to you. Now, why would people do something like this? People like Ibn Khaldun, they were really mines of information about the countries where they are coming from. And it was not too common, but a lot of episodes like this happened. And we'll use here two examples to illustrate that. For example, you might have heard of somebody called Al-Hasan Al-Wazzan. He's in the West. He's known more as Leo Africanus. He was also from Morocco, and he was captured by the papacy ultimately, and he was asked to write a whole book about the description of North Africa, and that description is still a very precious document until now. And something else will happen to Ibn Khaldun again in similar circumstances, and we'll talk about it, is that Ibn Khaldun, he will be asked a similar request by Timur. So we'll come back to it later, inshallah. Now after, so ultimately he went back to Morocco, and then again to Al-Andalus, and in the end it seems that he just decided to stop politics and retreat. But this is, by the way, the palace of Pedro the Cruel. And what you notice about it, that it looks absolutely Islamic. Because he took Sevilla, obviously, and this style is called something like Mudéjar style, and they say Mudéjar from Spanish. It comes supposedly from Al-Mudajjanun, who are the Muslims who were either forced to convert or stayed and worked for the Christians in Al-Andalus. So that's why you see the architecture looks absolutely. In fact, even the decoration is in Arabic. Now, so just to give you an idea of where Ibn Khaldun was. Now we'll talk a little bit about the retreats. So Ibn Khaldun tried to escape, in a sense, recruitment, and that's literally he escaped the recruitment of competing rulers, and he escaped to a place in what we call it's in modern day Algeria, called Qal'at Bani Salama, and he stayed there for 4 years. Now, what I need to mention is that also, although that he was involved in politics, that he kept interest in learning and teaching, especially in the city of Fas, where he talks clearly that he met amazing scholars, and it was his opportunity to study and to receive ijazat from great scholars and so forth. Now, so now after that, we said he went to the retreat for 4 years, and it's there in his retreat where he wrote his masterpiece. And let me just tell you, inshallah, that's from where the Muqaddimah is taken. Now, just to so Al-Muqaddimah obviously is basically the introduction of the book that he wrote during that time. And Al-Muqaddimah proper, we'll talk more about it. He said it took him about 5 5 months to write the first draft of Al-Muqaddimah. The whole book, it took him the 4 years. But he said, we are talking about the draft. And we'll say why. Because he didn't have libraries to check his sources and to document everything. And in fact, for that purpose, he will leave his retreat and go to Tunis, which was not too far away, where he was obviously welcomed by the Sultan there. And it took him another 4 years to finish the book in a good copy. And in fact, so that was the first time that he finished a very polished copy. And that copy is now known as the Tunisian copy, because later he will pick up the book once again and update it. And Ibn Khaldun mentioned that when the Sultan, when he went there, he somehow found himself back into politics. For example, the Sultan will take him with him in raids or battles, and he didn't like it. So what he said, he asked, it seems to be an excuse, we don't know. He asked that he wanted to go for Hajj. He was granted permission, and he left for Alexandria. And that was the last time he stayed in North Africa. He never came back. So then from Alexandria, he will ultimately do Hajj, but not that specific year. He said it just didn't happen. I would like to speak a little bit about what he did in Egypt before we move to the book proper. Very briefly, so when he went to Egypt, he started teaching in Al-Azhar. So he went back to teaching and scholarship. And for people who are interested in history, Al-Maqrizi, one of the great Mamluk scholars, historians namely, is the student of Ibn Khaldun. So Ibn Khaldun will have an influence on Maqrizi, and also he will have an influence on another historian, Al-Qalqashandi, known for Subh al-Asha. And so these are historians, but also he will meet, for example, other scholars like Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani. And in fact, not only that, Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani will ask Ibn Khaldun for an ijaza, meaning he appreciated his scholarship. They didn't always agree, and Ibn Khaldun gave it, and both of them, both the requests and the written ijaza from Ibn Khaldun, they are documented. In a sense, in Egypt, he was not, or he almost couldn't be removed completely from politics, because shortly he will be appointed, seemingly maybe to his surprise, as Qadi al-Qudah of the Malikiyah. So Qadi al-Qudah is almost, to use a common expression today, so almost Chief Justice of the Malikiyah in Egypt, which is obviously a very appreciated position. It's the maximum as a Maliki Qadi that you can reach. But since part of it was a political appointment, what happened that he will be appointed and removed 4 times within 5 years. So it tells you that it depends on what's going on, if there is a new sultan or whatever. So politics had a say there. Being of that status, he was also taken again in another military campaign when the sultan goes, or usually the important people in the state, they are taken. And this time it was another traumatic event. maybe less traumatic, but still politically it was very. This time we're talking about the Timur, Tamerlane. So Timur attacked, reached Syria, and it was about to take Damascus. And Syria at that time was part of, generally speaking, part of the Mamluk Empire, well, the Mamluk state. So the Mamluks had to respond. So the Sultan al-Nasir, the Mamluk, in 803 Hijrah, took the political and the military leadership with him and went to face Timur, especially with the hope of making that Damascus will not fall for Timur. And Timur, if I would assume that you know something about him, but in the Mongol tradition, that in a sense he saw himself as somebody who represents Genghis Khan, and he wanted to restore the Mongol once again, but it was under him. The big difference, Timur was a Muslim. No. And still they were known that when they attack a city or it will be almost nothing will be spared. What happened about that specific is that there were some skirmishes, I mean, back and forth. However, something quite dramatic happened. Part of what we call them, the Egyptian armies, they withdrew without al-Nasir's, who was the king, without his command. And they left back to Egypt. And seemingly, it was sadly, they were trying to place another sultan instead of al-Nasir. So al-Nasir saw that, he just stopped everything and went back to Egypt. But he left people like Ibn Khaldun. And that's quite interesting because we have Ibn Khaldun end up meeting Timur and documenting his conversation with him. It's from a historical perspective, it's an amazing episode. And it seems Timur knew, in fact, he asks about Ibn Khaldun. So when the scholars noticed the situation and they knew that there is no way they can resist Timur after the Egyptian army left, okay, they said, we'll go to him, we'll go to Timur, tell him there is no need to sack the city, we'll let you enter and you keep the peace. So the scholars of the Syrian scholars left, but Ibn Khaldun didn't go with them. But it seems he asked about Ibn Khaldun. Where is Ibn Khaldun? So that tells you, I mean, if we accept the narration, which I don't see a reason to doubt it, that he is appreciated and known. Anyway, once they met, there was a whole discussion. It was by translation, obviously. There was a scholar with Timur who made the translation, a Hanafi scholar. So because the conversation, obviously they didn't know Timur didn't speak Arabic. And the one thing that's worth mentioning, he told him, give me a description of your homeland. And he didn't let him go until he finished the description. And Ibn Khaldun had to do that, and after that asked for permission to go back to Egypt. Now we'll go back to the book. So the book, which the whole title is quite long. So كتاب العبر وديوان المبتدأ والخبر في أيام العرب والعجم والبربر ومن عاصرهم من ذوي السلطان الأكبر. So this is the name or the title of the whole book. We'll talk more about the title next times. And what we need to know that it has an introduction. Book 1, it started about Fil Umran. Now we are not going to translate Al-Umran now, but it is Al-Umran al-Bashari is the theory that Ibn Khaldun is presenting as a must to understand history. That's why the introduction and book 1 are referred to as Al-Muqaddimah. This is what we are going to focus on. Then book 2 and book 3. So book 2 starts with Akhbar al-Arab, so where he studied the history of the Arabs, but not only Arabs, because he will study other nations that came in contact with the Arabs, like the Persians, the Romans, and whatnot. And book 3 is Tarikh al-Barbar, which it goes more than that. Tarikh, which means the history of the Berbers. So the Berbers are the native people of North Africa. Now, by the way, Berber is becoming almost not a politically correct word. And, now the preference is to use Amazigh, which is the native expression. Then after that, after book 3, Ibn Khaldun added At-Ta'rif, where he talked about himself. Now we said we will focus only on introduction, which is short, and the book Fil Umran, which is most of Al-Muqaddimah. Now the Muqaddimah itself, book number 1, it has 6 sections. And the hope that for each section we'll give 1 session. And in the last one, we'll give an overview, and there will be especially modern approaches also to the Muqaddimah and the ideas in al-Muqaddimah. So we'll read them rather quickly. So in the first one, في العمران البشري على الجملة. So Al-Umran al-Bashari is the name of the discipline that Ibn Khaldun chose for his novel approach to history. Al-Umran al-Bashari. So al-Bashari is obviously human. Al-Umran is much more difficult to translate in this context. We'll talk about it, but sometimes it's translated as the whole thing. Al-Umran al-Bashari is now translated sometimes simply just sociology. Okay. Sometimes Al-Umran al-Bashari is translated something like loosely human civilization. Okay. Now, على الجملة, meaning he will give us a very general introduction. Then he will become specific. The second book, he will talk about في العمران البدوي والأمم الوحشية والقبائل. So now he will focus about human societies outside cities and tribes and so forth. Okay, because for Ibn Khaldun, that's a different structure. The word structure will come up a lot, especially when we compare him with modern schools of thoughts. So that's why it's a different section. Then he will talk about في الدول العامة والملك والخلافة والمرابط السلطانية. So here he will talk about kingship and ruling and what it takes and how it is done. نعم. Then في البلدان والأمصار وسائل عمران. So this is more studies of cities as opposed to العمران البدوي. Then the next one في المعاش ووجوبه من الكسب والصنائع. المعاش, loosely translated as livelihood, economy basically. How does economy work? So الصنائع, crafts and industries. Then, and he keep it until the end, في العلوم وأصنافها والتعليم وطرقه وسائر وجوهه. Sciences, scholarship, and education. And he put it in the end because he uses terms sometimes that for a modern person they sound evolutionists. Okay, so you have al-Badu, then you have city dwellers, you have the economy, then you have scholarship. Now, so I was just trying in the end give you a quick reference to the material culture that surrounded Ibn Khaldun. Meaning, for example, here, the kind of coins that he would have used. So this is dirhams, they were square dirhams. So the Marinid, for example, the Marinid dynasty, these are Marini dirhams. And they were known, they inherited, they were specifically square because they inherited them from the shape. They inherited this shape from the Almohad, who were the first to introduce it in North Africa. Then you have your dinars. This is Armarini dinars during the time for whom the dynasty that Ibn Khaldun worked for. This is just Al-Azhar in Egypt. This is an Almohad, very well known Almohad Masjid Qutubiyya in Morocco that Ibn Khaldun would have been familiar with. Naam. This is the time of Ibn Khaldun, but this is in Turkey, but it's still the same time of Ibn Khaldun. We will stop here for today. That was a general introduction, because this information, they will shed light on the expressions and the terms and the ideas that Ibn Khaldun will be dealing with. So if you have questions, please let us know. Excuse me? Why did he ask him to describe the city? Oh, he did. He asked him to describe, in fact, not only the city, but he told him, describe your country for me. And these people, you know, these are rulers. For them, this is intelligence, because he might, you know, if he has the chance, if he conquer Egypt, next door is North Africa, and he better have information about it. Yeah. So what we'll do next time is that we'll take the book Al-Muqaddimah, and we'll go section by section. And if we don't have questions, I know it's late. Thank you for being patient, and Assalamu alaikum.